What?
That's impossible!
Grandma, why me? Grace Whitmore left very clear instructions.
Good. Then read it. We all know the hotel belongs to us.
To my granddaughter, Emma Whitmore, I leave Magnolia House and my entire estate. What?
That's impossible!
Grandma, why me?
My grandmother died suddenly, and before she was even buried, my family was already planning to sell her hotel. At the will reading, they walked in expecting to inherit everything. But then the lawyer looked at me and said, "Grace Whitmore left you the entire $900 million estate." That night, my parents demanded I sign it all over. When I refused, they threw me out with one bag and one silver key. But what they didn't know was that key opened a hidden room inside Magnolia House. And inside was the proof that would destroy them all. Emma Whitmore was 28 years old, and in the eyes of her wealthy family, that was already too old to still be figuring life out. She lived in Savannah, Georgia, in a small second-floor apartment above a bakery that filled her mornings with the smell of cinnamon and warm bread. Her place was cramped, with peeling white paint, secondhand furniture, and stacks of sketchbooks piled beside the window. But Emma loved it. It was quiet, it was hers, and most importantly, it was far away from the cold marble floors of her parents' mansion. Emma was an art teacher at the Willow Creek Community Center, a modest brick building on the less polished side of town. She had soft brown hair, usually tied in a loose bun, paint often smudged on her fingers, and tired but gentle eyes that seemed to notice the things other people ignored. She didn't make much money, but every afternoon, when children filled her classroom with laughter, messy colors, and impossible dreams, she felt like her life had meaning. Her parents didn't agree. Preston Whitmore, her father, was a tall, sharp-faced man in his late 50s, always dressed in tailored suits and polished shoes. He worked in private finance and treated every conversation like a business negotiation. To him, success meant money, status, and control. Her mother, Caroline Whitmore, was elegant and cold, with perfectly styled blonde hair, pearl earrings, and a voice that could sound sweet while cutting someone apart. Caroline cared deeply about appearances, charity luncheons, country club invitations, and what people whispered behind crystal glasses. Then there was Blake Whitmore, Emma's older brother. Blake was 32, handsome, confident, and reckless in the way only spoiled sons could afford to be. He worked in finance under their father, though everyone knew Preston had opened every door for him. Still, Blake was treated like the future of the family, while Emma was treated like a mistake they were forced to explain. At Sunday dinner, Emma sat quietly while her family discussed investments, real estate, and Blake's latest business idea. When Caroline finally looked at her, it wasn't with interest. "Are you still teaching finger painting to children?" her mother asked. Emma lowered her fork. "I teach art, Mom." Preston gave a dry laugh. "Art doesn't build a future, Emma. It delays one." Blake smirked. "Come on, Dad. Somebody has to teach poor kids how to draw rainbows." Emma said nothing, but her fingers tightened around her napkin. The next afternoon, at the community center, Emma met Lily Dawson again. Lily was 9 years old, thin, quiet, and always wearing the same faded purple jacket. She had large green eyes and a serious expression far older than her age. But when she painted, everything changed. Her hands moved with confidence, turning cheap paper and donated paint into sunsets, gardens, and houses that looked warmer than real ones. After class, Lily's mother, Maria Dawson, waited near the door. Maria was a tired-looking woman in her early 30s, wearing a grocery store uniform and carrying the weight of too many unpaid bills in her posture. "I'm sorry, Miss Whitmore," Maria said softly. "Lily won't be able to continue next month. I just can't cover the fee. Lily stared at the floor, gripping her little backpack. Emma felt something twist in her chest. She thought of her father's expensive watch, her mother's pearls, Blake's careless jokes. Then she thought of Lily's paintings still drying on the table. She has a scholarship, Emma said. Maria blinked. What? Emma smiled gently. The center has a small art scholarship. Lily earned it. There was no scholarship. Not officially. That night, Emma opened her banking app and transferred the payment from her own savings. It meant delaying her car repair again. It meant eating cheaper meals for a few weeks. But when she looked at Lily's painting on her desk, Emma knew she had made the right choice. Her family could call her a failure. But in that tiny classroom, with paint on her hands and a child's dream protected for one more month, Emma felt richer than they would ever understand. After Emma paid Lily's art fee, she spent the rest of the week pretending not to worry about money. Her car made a strange coughing sound every time she turned the key, and her grocery list became shorter than usual. Still, when Lily walked into class with a shy smile and a fresh sketchbook under her arm, Emma knew she would make the same choice again. That Friday afternoon, Emma left the community center and drove across Savannah toward Magnolia House. The historic hotel stood beneath ancient oak trees draped in Spanish moss, its white columns glowing softly in the late sun. Tourists came from all over the country to stay there, calling it elegant, haunted, and unforgettable. But to Emma, Magnolia House had never felt like a hotel. It felt like the one place where she could breathe. Grace Whitmore, Emma's grandmother, was waiting for her in the garden courtyard. Grace was in her late 70s, with silver hair pinned neatly at the back of her head, bright blue eyes, and a calmness that made powerful people lower their voices around her. She owned Magnolia House and several boutique hotels across the South, but she dressed simply in a pale cardigan, worn flats, and a floral scarf Emma had painted for her years ago. "You're late," Grace said, though her smile was warm. "My car is developing a personality," Emma replied. Grace chuckled and reached for her hand. "Then perhaps it needs a better listener." They walked past blooming magnolia trees and iron benches toward the small art room Grace had created inside the hotel years ago. It was a sunlit space filled with easels, old frames, and shelves of donated supplies. Grace had built it after Emma once said, "Every beautiful building should have a room where children could make a mess." Inside, Grace studied Emma's face for a long moment. "You helped someone again, didn't you?" Emma looked away. "I don't know what you mean." "You have the same expression your grandfather used to have after giving away money he claimed he didn't give away." Emma smiled, but her eyes softened. "There's a girl in my class, Lily. She's talented, Grandma, really talented. Her mother couldn't pay anymore, so you paid for her." Emma didn't answer. Grace touched her shoulder gently. "Never be ashamed of protecting a gift in someone else." Emma swallowed the sudden emotion in her throat. At home, kindness was treated like weakness. Here, Grace made it feel like strength. That evening, they sat together in the private parlor of Magnolia House. Grace poured tea into chipped porcelain cups instead of the expensive silver service guests expected. On the wall hung paintings by local artists Emma loved, pieces her parents would have dismissed as worthless. "Your mother called me yesterday," Grace said quietly. Emma stiffened. "About what?" "She thinks I should speak to you about getting a real job." Emma gave a small, bitter laugh. "Of course she does." Grace looked at her firmly. "Listen to me, Emma. Money can buy a house, but it cannot buy a home. Your parents never understood the difference." Emma stared into her tea. "Sometimes I wonder if I'm wasting my life." "No," Grace said at once. "You are building something they cannot measure." Before Emma left, Grace took a small velvet pouch from the drawer beside her chair. Inside was an old silver key, darkened with age, with a tiny magnolia flower engraved near the handle. Emma frowned. "What is this?" "A key," Grace said simply. "To what?" Grace closed Emma's fingers around it. "One day, you'll understand why you need it." Emma laughed softly, assuming it was another family keepsake. "You're being mysterious again." Grace's smile faded just slightly. Some things must wait until the right moment. Emma slipped the key into her purse, unaware that it opened more than a locked door. It opened the one room in Magnolia House where Grace had hidden the truth no one else was supposed to find. 3 days after Grace placed the silver key in Emma's hand, Emma received a call that split her life in two. It was early morning, just after sunrise. Emma was sitting at her small kitchen table, reviewing Lily's newest sketch, when her phone rang. The screen showed Magnolia House. For a moment, she smiled, thinking Grace had forgotten their lunch plans and was calling to remind her. But the voice on the other end was not Grace's. It was Samuel Brooks, the general manager of Magnolia House. Samuel was a calm, broad-shouldered man in his early 50s, with dark skin, close-cropped gray hair, and a quiet seriousness that made guests trust him instantly. He had worked for Grace for nearly 20 years and treated the hotel as if it were a living thing. "Emma," Samuel said, his voice strained. "I need you to sit down." Her fingers tightened around the phone. "What happened?" There was a silence, and in that silence, Emma already knew. "Your grandmother suffered a stroke last night," Samuel said softly. "The doctors did everything they could. I'm so sorry." The room seemed to tilt. Emma stood too quickly, knocking her chair backward. The sketch in front of her blurred, Lily's painted yellow house turning into a smear of color through her tears. "No," she whispered. "I just saw her." "I know," Samuel said. "She asked about you before the ambulance came." Emma pressed a hand over her mouth, but the sound still escaped her. Grace, who had always seemed unshakable, who had filled rooms with warmth and quiet strength, was gone. The funeral took place 4 days later at a historic church near Forsyth Park. The building was filled with white lilies, polished pews, and important people wearing black. Business owners, city officials, hotel guests, and old family friends came to honor Grace Whitmore, the woman who had preserved Magnolia House when others wanted to turn it into luxury condos. Emma stood near the front, wearing a simple black dress and holding the silver key in her coat pocket like a lifeline. She had cried until her eyes burned. Every hymn felt too loud. Every condolence sounded too small. Her parents arrived late. Preston Whitmore walked in with his perfect suit, stiff posture, and dry eyes. Caroline followed in a designer black dress, dabbing at her face with a lace handkerchief, though Emma saw no tears. Blake trailed behind them, checking his phone until Caroline nudged him sharply. To strangers, they looked devastated. To Emma, they looked rehearsed. During the service, Caroline leaned into an elderly guest and whispered, "Mother loved this church so much," as if she had not spent years complaining that Grace cared more about old buildings than family reputation. Preston accepted sympathy with a grave nod, but Emma overheard him near the side aisle speaking in a low voice to Blake. "Magnolia House sits on prime land," Preston murmured. "If the board cooperates, we could liquidate within months." Blake replied, "The Charleston property alone could cover my expansion plan." Emma turned slowly, her grief hardening into disbelief. Grace had not even been buried yet. At the reception afterward, held inside Magnolia House, the family's performance continued. Caroline stood beside Grace's portrait, telling guests how close they had been. Preston spoke solemnly about responsibility and legacy. Blake lifted a glass of champagne and called his grandmother a remarkable woman, though he had barely visited her unless he needed money. Emma could barely breathe inside the lie. While guests gathered in the ballroom, Samuel noticed Blake slip away down the eastern hallway. At first, Samuel thought Blake might be looking for a private place to grieve. But then he saw him stop outside Grace's locked office. Blake looked over both shoulders, pulled something from his jacket, and forced the door open. Samuel did not confront him. Not yet. Instead, he stepped into the security room and quietly copied the camera footage from that hallway onto a private drive. His face was grim as he watched Blake disappear into Grace's office. Whatever Blake was looking for, Samuel knew one thing clearly. Grace had been right not to trust her family, and Emma was going to need proof. The call from Martha Ellis came 2 days after the funeral reception. Martha Ellis was Grace Whitmore's longtime attorney, a woman in her early 60s with silver blonde hair cut neatly at her chin, sharp gray eyes, and a voice so controlled it could quiet a room without being raised. She had represented Grace for more than 30 years, handling hotel contracts, property disputes, and private family matters no one else was allowed to touch. "Emma," Martha said over the phone, "your grandmother's will is ready to be read. She requested that you, your parents, and your brother be present." Emma sat on the edge of her bed, still wearing the same cardigan she had worn to Magnolia House the day before. The silver key Grace had given her lay on the nightstand beside an unopened sympathy card. "Do I have to be there?" Emma asked quietly. "Yes," Martha replied. Grace was very clear about that. The next morning, Emma arrived at Martha's office, a quiet law firm on Broughton Street with tall windows and dark green walls. Her stomach was tight. She expected a few sentimental items, maybe a painting, maybe one of Grace's old scarves. She did not expect peace, but she also did not expect war. Preston, Caroline, and Blake were already there. Preston stood near the window, checking his watch as if the entire meeting were an inconvenience. Caroline sat with perfect posture, wearing black silk and pearls, her expression composed but impatient. Blake leaned back in a leather chair, scrolling through his phone with one hand and tapping the table with the other. "You're late," Preston said. Emma glanced at the clock. "I'm 5 minutes early." "No one asked for your commentary," Caroline said softly. Martha entered before Emma could respond. She carried a thick folder and a tablet. Without small talk, she took her seat at the head of the table. "Grace Whitmore updated her will 18 months ago," Martha began. "She was examined by 2 independent physicians and declared fully competent. I was present for every signature. There is no legal question regarding her mental capacity." Blake finally looked up. "Great, then read it." Martha opened the folder. "To my granddaughter, Emma Whitmore, I leave Magnolia House, all associated hotel properties, business holdings, personal assets, investment accounts, and remaining estate holdings, with an estimated total value exceeding $900 million. The room went completely silent. Emma stared at Martha, certain she had misunderstood. Then Blake slammed his hand onto the table. "What the hell?" Caroline's face went pale. "That cannot be correct." Preston rose slowly, his jaw tightening. "My mother would never leave her empire to Emma." Martha did not flinch. "She did." Blake pointed at Emma. "She teaches paint classes to kids, Dad. She can't run hotels. She can't even afford decent shoes." Emma's cheeks burned, but she could not speak. The number, the properties, the responsibility, it all pressed down on her at once. Preston leaned toward Martha. "There has been a mistake." "There has not," Martha said. Caroline turned to Emma, her voice sharp beneath its polished surface. What did you say to her? What did you make her believe? Emma shook her head. Nothing. I didn't ask for this. Martha touched the tablet screen. Grace anticipated this reaction. A video appeared on the wall monitor. Grace sat in her private parlor at Magnolia House, wearing the floral scarf Emma had painted for her. Her face looked tired, but her eyes were clear. "If you are watching this," Grace said, "then I am gone, and my family is likely very angry." Emma covered her mouth. Grace continued. "I chose Emma because she is the only one who ever loved Magnolia House as a legacy, not as merchandise. Preston saw land, Caroline saw status, Blake saw a bank account. Emma saw a home." Preston's face darkened. Grace's voice became firmer. "For years, I documented every request for money, every attempt to pressure me into selling, every conversation where my wishes were ignored. Martha has those records. Do not pretend this decision was sudden. It was earned." Blake pushed back from the table. "This is insane." Grace looked directly into the camera. "Emma, if they make you feel small, remember this. I did not choose you because you were weak. I chose you because you were the only one strong enough to protect what matters." The video ended. No one moved. Then Preston looked at Emma with a coldness she had never seen before. "This is not over," he said. Emma sat frozen, one hand gripping the silver key in her pocket. For the first time, she understood that Grace had not simply left her an inheritance. She had left her a battle. That evening, Emma had barely returned to her apartment when her phone lit up with her father's name. For a moment, she considered letting it ring. Her hands were still cold from the will reading, and Grace's words kept echoing in her head. "I chose you because you were the only one strong enough to protect what matters." But Preston Whitmore did not leave messages unless he wanted obedience. When Emma answered, his voice came through flat and controlled. "Come home at 8. We need to settle this as a family." Before she could respond, he ended the call. The Whitmore mansion looked exactly as Emma remembered it. Tall windows, white stone steps, iron lanterns glowing beside the front door. But that night, it didn't feel like home. It felt like a courtroom where the verdict had already been decided. Preston stood in the study beside his mahogany desk, still wearing his suit from Martha's office. Caroline sat on the cream sofa, elegant and pale, twisting her wedding ring slowly around her finger. Blake leaned against the bar cart with a drink in his hand, watching Emma like she had stolen something from him. Preston pushed a folder across the desk. "Sign this." Emma looked down but did not touch it. Across the top, in bold legal language, were the words, "Transfer of Management Authority." Preston spoke as if he were explaining something to a child. "You will remain the beneficiary on paper, but I will control the estate, the hotel group, and all financial decisions. In return, you'll receive an allowance, a very generous one." Caroline added softly, "Enough money to live beautifully, darling. You won't have to worry about rent, repairs, or little art classes ever again." Blake laughed under his breath. "Honestly, you should be grateful. You're an art teacher, Emma. You don't know mergers, taxes, investors, boards, or hotel operations. Magnolia House would collapse in your hands." He stepped closer, his smile turning cruel. "Grandma got sentimental at the end. That's all this was. But we can fix it before you embarrass everyone." Emma looked at the papers again, then at Blake's expensive watch, her mother's pearls, her father's cold eyes. For the first time, she understood the room was not filled with family. It was filled with people negotiating over her. Caroline rose and took Emma's hands, her voice suddenly trembling with practiced emotion. "Please don't do this to us. If you refuse, you'll tear this family apart. People will talk. Your father's reputation will suffer. Blake's future could be ruined. Do you really want to be the daughter who destroyed everything your grandmother built? For a second, Emma almost weakened. She wanted a mother who loved her. She wanted a father who saw her. She wanted a brother who protected her instead of mocking her. But then she noticed Caroline's eyes flick down to the unsigned documents, and the truth landed hard in Emma's chest. They didn't need her. They needed her signature. Emma slowly pulled her hands away. No. The word was quiet, but it changed the room. Preston's face darkened. Blake swore and slammed his glass onto the bar cart. Caroline's softness disappeared so quickly, it frightened Emma. "You selfish girl!" her mother hissed. Preston walked around the desk and stood inches from her. "Then understand this clearly. If you walk out without signing, you are choosing money over your family." Emma held the silver key in her coat pocket, feeling its cool edge against her palm. "No," she said again, steadier this time. "I'm choosing Grandma's wishes over your greed." Preston stared at Emma as if the word no had slapped him across the face. For a long moment, no one moved. The study was silent, except for the ticking of the antique clock on the mantel and Blake's angry breathing near the bar cart. Emma kept one hand inside her coat pocket, wrapped tightly around Grace's silver key. Then Preston's voice dropped low. "Say that again." Emma's throat felt dry, but she forced herself to meet his eyes. "I'm not signing anything." Caroline rose from the sofa, her face twisted with disbelief. "After everything this family has given you." Emma looked at her mother. "You mean everything Grandma gave me?" Blake stepped forward. Careful. But Emma was tired of being careful. She was tired of shrinking, tired of apologizing for having a life they didn't respect, tired of pretending their insults were concern. "You don't want to protect me," she said. "You want to control what she left behind." Preston's expression hardened completely. "Then you are no longer a daughter of this family." The words landed like a physical blow. Even though Emma had expected anger, some small, wounded part of her had still hoped he wouldn't say it. Caroline looked away, not shocked, not sorry. Blake only smiled, like he had been waiting for this moment. Preston pointed toward the hallway. "Go upstairs. Pack one bag. You have 15 minutes." Emma stood frozen. "Now," he said. Her childhood bedroom felt smaller than she remembered. The cream walls were still lined with framed certificates, old art ribbons, and a few photographs Caroline had never bothered to remove. Emma pulled a worn duffel bag from the closet and filled it with what she could. 2 sweaters, jeans, her sketchbook, a folder of teaching materials, and the small framed photo of herself and Grace standing in front of Magnolia House. She paused at the dresser and opened the top drawer. Inside was a faded birthday card Grace had given her years ago. On the front was a watercolor magnolia. Inside, Grace had written, "Never let anyone convince you that gentle means weak." Emma pressed the card to her chest, then tucked it into the bag. When she came downstairs, Preston was waiting by the front door. Caroline stood behind him with her arms crossed. Blake leaned against the staircase, enjoying the scene. "You'll regret this," Caroline said coldly. "That hotel won't love you back." Emma looked at all 3 of them. Maybe not, but at least it was never cruel to me. Preston opened the door. "Out!" The night air was damp and cold. Emma stepped onto the stone porch with one bag over her shoulder and no home behind her. The door slammed so hard the lantern beside it shook. For a moment, she stood in the driveway, trembling. Then she reached into her pocket and felt the silver key. Magnolia House. The drive across Savannah felt unreal. Streetlights blurred through her tears, and her old car rattled beneath her like it might give up before she did. But when the white columns of Magnolia House appeared through the moss-covered oaks, Emma finally breathed. The hotel was quiet, its windows glowing softly in the dark. She let herself in through the side entrance Grace had always used and walked straight to the library. Something inside her told her the key belonged there. Behind a tall shelf of old travel books, Emma noticed a small silver lock hidden in the carved wood. Her pulse quickened. She slid the key inside. It turned. A narrow door opened into a small room behind the library. Emma stepped in and switched on a brass lamp. The room smelled of paper, cedar, and dust. On the desk sat a sealed letter with her name written in Grace's handwriting. With shaking hands, Emma opened it. "My dearest Emma, if you found this room, then they have already shown you who they are." Emma sank into the chair, tears spilling silently. Around the room were labeled boxes: legal records, hotel contracts, personal journals, bank statements, and audio recordings. One folder contained notes about Preston and Caroline pressuring Grace to sell Magnolia House. Another held printed emails from Blake asking for money and demanding early access to family assets. There were years of proof. Grace had not left Emma defenseless. She had left her a shield. Emma wiped her face and looked around the hidden room. For the first time that night, she no longer felt thrown away. She felt chosen. By morning, Emma had barely slept. She sat in the hidden room behind the library, surrounded by Grace's files, journals, and recordings, trying to understand how long her grandmother had been preparing for this. At 7:30, Samuel Brooks arrived with coffee and a calm expression, though his eyes were serious. "They'll come today," he said. Emma looked down at Grace's letter, then nodded. "I know." Less than an hour later, Martha Ellis walked in carrying a leather briefcase. Beside her was Nora Whitfield, Grace's former head chef, a round-faced woman in her 60s with silver curls, warm brown eyes, and the kind of steady kindness that made people confess things over soup. Behind them came Judge William Hayes, a retired judge in his 70s, tall and dignified, with a cane, a charcoal suit, and a voice that carried authority even in silence. By 10 o'clock, 3 black cars rolled up the driveway. Preston stepped out first, polished and furious. Caroline followed in a cream coat, her face tight with controlled anger. Blake came last, wearing sunglasses and dragging a smug-looking attorney beside him. Their lawyer, Vincent Cole, was a thin man with slick black hair, a sharp navy suit, and a smile that looked practiced in mirrors. Samuel opened the front door before they could pound on it. Preston pushed inside as if the hotel still belonged to him. "Enough games," he snapped. "Emma, you are going to sign the transfer today." Vincent placed a folder on the table. "My clients are prepared to challenge the will on grounds of undue influence and emotional manipulation." Martha stepped forward calmly. "That would be unwise." Vincent smiled. "And why is that?" Martha opened her briefcase and placed Grace's medical evaluations, signed statements, and video confirmation on the table. "Because Grace Whitmore was fully competent, legally advised, and very specific about excluding your clients from control." Preston's face reddened. Caroline turned to Emma with trembling lips. "This is cruel. You're letting outsiders poison you against your own blood." Emma's voice shook, but she didn't look away. "No, Mom. Grandma showed me the truth. You only came here when you wanted something." Samuel then connected a flash drive to the ballroom screen. The security footage appeared. Blake in Grace's hallway after the funeral, glancing over his shoulder, forcing open her office door, and searching through drawers. Blake ripped off his sunglasses. That's not what it looks like. Samuel's voice was firm. It looks like you entered a locked office and searched for documents you had no right to touch. Nora stepped forward with a folder of her own. And it wasn't the first time. Mrs. Whitmore heard enough over the years to know what this family wanted. She handed Martha a transcript. Grace asked me to keep copies in case anything happened. Martha pressed play on an audio recording. Preston's voice filled the room, cold and unmistakable. If the old woman would just die already, everything would finally be ours. The words seemed to freeze the air. Caroline went pale. Blake stopped moving. Vincent Cole's confident smile vanished. Emma felt the sentence strike her chest, not because it surprised her, but because hearing it out loud destroyed the last fragile hope she had been holding. Judge Hayes leaned forward on his cane. Mr. Whitmore, I strongly suggest you reconsider any legal threats. Between the attempted theft, documented pressure, and this recording, your position is not only weak, it is dangerous. Preston looked around the room and realized no one was afraid of him anymore. Martha had the law. Samuel had the footage. Nora had the records. Judge Hayes had the authority. And Emma had finally found her voice. She stood at the center of Magnolia House, the silver key hanging from a chain around her neck. You called me useless, she said quietly. You said I was too weak to protect this place. But Grandma knew exactly who you were. And now, so do I. Preston's jaw tightened. You'll regret humiliating this family. Emma shook her head. No, you humiliated yourselves. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Vincent gathered his papers without meeting Preston's eyes. We should leave, he muttered. Caroline opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Blake backed toward the door, his arrogance gone. Preston lingered the longest, staring at Emma like she had become someone he no longer recognized. Maybe she had. Samuel opened the door, and one by one they walked out of Magnolia House. When the last car disappeared beyond the oak trees, Emma's knees nearly gave out. Nora caught her hand. Martha touched her shoulder. Judge Hayes gave a small nod. Samuel said softly, Grace would have been proud. Emma looked around the hotel, no longer feeling like a frightened guest. For the first time, Magnolia House felt like hers. The morning after the confrontation, Emma stood in the ballroom of Magnolia House with Martha Ellis beside her and Samuel Brooks near the doors. Her hands still trembled, but her voice did not. Preston, Caroline, and Blake had tried to frighten her with lawyers, guilt, and threats. Now Martha sent them one final notice. Emma Whitmore would not transfer control of Magnolia House, the hotel group, or any part of Grace's estate. If they challenged the will again, the security footage, recordings, journals, and witness statements would be submitted publicly in court. Within days, the Whitmore family's power began to crack. Blake was contacted by investigators about his invitation stopped coming. Luncheon tables grew quiet when Caroline entered. Business partners stopped returning Preston's calls. The family that had cared so much about appearances was finally destroyed by what people could now see. Emma did not celebrate their humiliation. Not the way Blake would have, not the way Preston would have. Instead, she walked through Magnolia House room by room, learning what Grace had protected. She met with hotel employees, listened to their concerns, and promised no one would be discarded for quick profit. Nora Whitfield returned to help restore the old kitchen program. Samuel rebuilt staff confidence. Martha kept the legal walls strong. For the first time, Emma was not trying to prove she belonged. She was acting like someone who already did. A month later, Emma unlocked the closed east wing of Magnolia House, the part Grace had once used for storage and private events. With help from Samuel, Nora, and volunteers from the community center, she transformed it into the Grace Whitmore Art Foundation, One room became a free painting studio for children. Another became a quiet workshop for women rebuilding their lives after betrayal, divorce, or abandonment. Emma kept Grace's words painted above the entrance. Money can buy a house, but it cannot buy a home. Every brush, every table, every open door felt like an answer to the people who had called her useless. On opening day, Lily Dawson arrived holding her mother's hand. Lily wore the same faded purple jacket from Emma's class, but this time, her eyes were bright with wonder. Maria Dawson cried when Emma told her Lily was the Foundation's first official student, with all supplies, lessons, and future art programs fully covered. Lily ran to the nearest easel and began painting Magnolia House beneath a golden sky. When Emma saw the picture, her throat tightened. The hotel no longer looked like a place of secrets and grief. Through Lily's eyes, it looked warm, alive, and safe. That evening, after everyone had gone, Emma stood alone in the new gallery. On the main wall hung a portrait of Grace Whitmore, silver hair, blue eyes, and the faint smile that had always made Emma feel brave. Around the room were children's paintings, women's sketches, and the first signs of a future built from kindness instead of greed. Emma touched the silver key resting against her chest and looked up at her grandmother's portrait. "I kept your house," she whispered. "And this time, it's truly a home." If you were Emma, what would you have done? Would you forgive the family who threw you away the moment you refused to hand over the inheritance? Or would you protect your grandmother's final wish, even if it meant cutting them off forever? Was Emma selfish for keeping everything? Or was her family the real problem for only loving her when money was involved? Comment your choice below. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more powerful, emotional stories like this.